Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about this new surprise self-titled album from Beyonce. So, okay, imagine you're a music critic for a major publication. Imagine that you've reviewed well over 100 albums throughout the course of this year, and you've collaborated with your colleagues finally to post your list of the best albums of the year. Imagine your sighs of relief when the list finally goes live in early December, and the irritated scoffs that you make when the comments light up inevitably with complaints that you discounted some album or other. You think in the back of your mind, hey, what the hell do they know? I do this for a living, goddammit. This list was hard to make and we can't put everything on it. You put that list eventually into the back of your mind just for your own sanity's sake, because hell, it's not like anybody's going to release any albums worth caring about in December, right? And then imagine you get a call from your boss in the middle of the night, just over a week later, screaming bloody murder because somehow a press leak just revealed that a major pop star decided to, without warning or promotion or even a lead-off single, drop an entire album onto iTunes. And keep in mind, this isn't your run-of-the-mill pop star either, but one who is married to an all-star rapper, one of the biggest in the business, and a high-powered businessman to boot, who has enlisted some of the best producers worldwide for this album, and who is obviously taking a big interest in his wife's success. And with no promotion, the only way that this album will sell the numbers that this pop star is hoping for is through the critical press. And considering that this artist's last album was a critically acclaimed smash hit 2 years earlier, suddenly that year-end list that you put together of the best albums of the year starts to look a little bit more shaky now, doesn't it? Now, okay, I'm likely somewhat wrong here, but I can just imagine that the editorial teams from major outlets and who cover music like the AV Club or Rolling Stone, who already dropped their best of list earlier this month, are panicking when they heard that Beyonce did pretty much exactly what I described, releasing a self-titled record to iTunes with no promotion or even a lead-off single. Fortunately, not having yet finalized my year-end list, I did what any music critic does with a surprise release. Get up early in the morning, put the album on repeat, and work the best I can to take it in. Believe it or not, I was actually somewhat happy that Beyonce had put out an album this year. Now, I'm no big fan of hers, but her last album, 4, was incredibly strong, as she's working with some of the best names in the industry across the board. So, how did Beyonce's self-titled album, Beyonce, turn out? Oh god. This is not going to be an easy one to talk about, because let's make this clear, Beyonce's self-titled album, it's not bad, but I can't precisely call it a success either because it doesn't quite succeed in what it's trying to do, to make a sexually explicit and hot as hell R&B album and then fuse it with a feminist empowerment message. And though, look, Beyonce is definitely trying to make both these elements work on this album, neither of them quite click as well as they should, mostly because Beyonce doesn't seem to have a focused direction how to properly bring these themes together, and her creative team are a lot worse off. So, okay, first let's talk about Beyonce herself. Now, I've been open in the past how I've never been a big fan of Beyonce as a singer. I've never liked Destiny's Child, I didn't like her solo work, and her big singles like Irreplaceable and Single Ladies, they've never been songs I've liked. My issue with Beyonce has always come down to her delivery. Beyonce is a powerful singer with a big range, and she's great about singing about how she is awesome. She's not especially subtle or raw in that range, but she's effective. But outside of that vocal range, outside of those topics, she's just not as strong or interesting singing about vulnerable subject material because, well, she's not subtle, and it can be hard to buy into her investment in that material. Now, on this album, there are definitely points where she has improved in this direction, and the big highlights of this album are where you can buy that the songs come from a real emotional place, especially the album Closer, directed at her baby daughter Blue. Unfortunately, this album is much more concerned with making explicit, cooing sex jams that would probably be a better fit for Mariah Carey than Beyonce, if I'm being honest. And as much as Beyonce is really trying to sell these songs here, it was hard for me to buy into them. Now, this is mostly linked with the album's twin Intense, a sexually explicit album married with third-wave feminism, emphasizing female power and women who embrace and enjoy their sexuality. Now, as a feminist, yes, guys can be a feminist, deal with that. I think that this is a fantastic idea for an album, and one that Beyonce is almost uniquely perfect to make given her reputation in the pop sphere. And there are moments on this album that really strike a great chord in this vein. There's this sampled TED's Talk monologue about female education by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, which is as direct as you can make the message. The opening track, Pretty Hurts, attacks superficial beauty standards imposed upon women by society at large, often controlled by men, and Songs like No Angel, Jealous, and Superpower do wonders for spelling out Beyonce's third-wave feminist message. And you know what? I'll give her real credit for showing vulnerability in songs like Heaven and Blue, showing that love and motherhood and that real passion are still essential elements to the female experience. And you know what? I just wish that everyone else was on the same page as Beyonce here, because the songwriting on this album doesn't do enough in this category, mostly because the sexual encounters still seem to be taking place on the terms of the male in question, and often with some unfortunately questionable connotations behind them. Take the duet with her husband, for instance, which is this money, power, sex anthem that's got this squealing, half-synthetic child baby voice that got incredibly grating very fast. Jay-Z, I have to ask you this. Was it really goddamn necessary to make an Ike Turner reference on Beyonce's feminist-themed album? Or let's take the song Mine, a song where Beyonce seems to be referencing the complicated dynamic of her relationship with her husband, because it sounds like it would be a complicated dynamic given their superstar presence. Drake, would it have killed you to keep things classy and not have lines like, "And you tell me that you are done with that, and I believe it's true as long as you know who you belong to"? Really, Drake? You're trying to imply that she belongs to somebody? Not cool, dude. And even Beyonce, look, you have to know what songs like Partition sound like, with lines about your man getting so horny in the limo that he rips your clothes off so you can have sex with you, and then make Monica Lewinsky references. Or Rocket, a sex song that has all sorts of questionable sex references, like "Hold me till I scream for air to breathe." Nice reference to oral sex there. Or the bad girl roleplay in the fourth verse. Hell, even take the song Blow, which is exactly what it sounds like and takes all sorts of oral sex connotations and ends up sounding like the gender flip version of R. Kelly's Cookies. The problem here is that these songs understand the classic mistake between being sexual and being sexy. It's too explicit and none of it appears remotely classy. And the other big problem is framing. Most of these songs don't show Beyonce as the power in there, or even much of an equal in these relationships. So there's a major tonal inconsistency between these songs and those with the stronger feminist themes. And even those with the stronger feminist elements, they don't always stick the landing. Take Pretty Hurts, it gets the basic text of defining female preferences by female standards and rising above superficiality. And then again, why then does Beyonce have lines like, "This time I'm gonna take the crown without falling down," where it appears that she's conforming to the very same system that she's protesting against? It's not really much of a subversion there. And if anything, it seems that a lot more of Beyonce's confrontational focus is directed at other women instead of men in songs like Flawless, which, look, that doesn't help create any of that solidarity that she might be looking to build. But then again, that doesn't suffer on the other big problem, the one that really set this album down a scale for me, which is the instrumentation, not the production. For the most part, that's fine, if it's a little bit heavy on the reverb and echo at points. But the instrumentation suffers a lot of the same problems that have always tended to show up on previous Beyonce records, namely a complete lack of tune. There's a lot of noisy percussion, some slick, watery synths, extraneous voices that only seem to detract from Beyonce's presence, and none of it sounds nearly as classy or opulent as Beyonce seems to think it does, and none of it has a good melody line or hook to really stick with me. Now, I'll give Pharrell some credit for adding some funk-inspired grooves whenever has a chance to produce, but none of this album has any real force or weighty beats or presence or even all that much texture to balance out against Beyonce, which I can't help but think is a real misstep here. It doesn't help matters that the tone of this album is so bleak and minimalist and empty and disturbingly unsexy that so much of this album begins to feel very long, very early on, which it is because Beyonce apparently took a page from Justin Timberlake's playbook, and many of the tracks run well over 4 minutes when they don't need to. And like with Justin Timberlake, this album is in desperate need of an editor. I've got a feeling that a lot of the extraneous repetition could have been cut to make this album a lot sharper, and too many of the tracks just feel indulgent and stretched out for no discernible good reason, especially when the lyrics can't support the length and the lyrics aren't well written enough to keep me interested. Ugh. Look, I really wanted to like this album a lot more than I do because the intent and the theme behind it are definitely worth talking about. They're definitely major themes that Beyonce I'm so happy she's going in this direction. But the execution does not do these themes anything close to justice. Worse still is that the fact that some of the studio process that Beyonce has such scorn and boredom for could have made this album a lot stronger simply by the virtue of tighter editing or catching up with some of the questionable songwriting. And while this album is better than her husband's, it's a step down from 4, and you know what? It's nowhere near as good as Janelle Monáe's feminist tour de force The Electric Lady from earlier this year. In fact, you know what? That's a good idea. Beyonce's self-titled album, Beyonce, it gets a 6 out of 10 from me and a recommendation only if you've already heard The Electric Lady by Janelle Monáe. Otherwise, look folks, while Beyonce was taking a stab at third wave feminist themes, Janelle Monáe did it a whole lot better, so I advise you check that out again instead. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I can expect to get some hate for this, but hey, it's how I feel. I wanted to like this album. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to cover that came out this year, before the end of the year, that they might end up on my year-end list, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Until then, see you next time.